big question, I would say, in the world of sports right now was how were the Lakers going to respond against the Trailblazers in the NBA playoffs? And the answer was pretty well. But I don't know whether this told us more about the Lakers or more about the Trailblazers, because it really felt like the Trailblazers, who had been on offensive fire, just basically didn't show up. And in particular, they never really seemed to play with a very high level of intensity throughout this game. So I don't know whether this was a function of the Trailblazers being so excited about the fact that they beat the Lakers in the first game, and they felt like it's almost the equivalent of if you had home and homes in the NBA. A lot of times winning a road game, you'd see the other team not play very well in the second home game. But inside of the bubble, there's no real home advantage at all. And frankly, the Lakers just looked like they were toying around with the Trailblazers, and maybe the Trailblazers just ran into some overall fatigue because they never really showed up in this game at all. We're tied up in that series 1-1. The Magic went down to the Bucks. The Bucks never really were in doubt in that game either. So both number one seeds, the Lakers and the Bucks, who lost their first openers in the playoffs, bounced back and were pretty dominant. Otherwise, the Rockets and the Heat both extend their lead to 2-0 in those series. Now, this hasn't gotten a great deal of attention, but we got a lot that we're going to do in today's show. So let me just kind of give you a rundown of where we are headed. I want to talk more about what to me is the biggest story of the week, which continues to be the lies coming out of the Big Ten about why college football can't be played. I'm going to dive into that with you guys in a big way. We've got Jeff Snook, who has covered Ohio State quite a bit, who has written a great deal about the Big Ten, and who, frankly, also has written 14 books over the past 20, 30 years worth of his career. He's going to spend a lot of time with us in the second hour talking about this Big Ten mess. And I'm also going to talk about the lawsuit that is now being threatened by the Nebraska parents and why I think that could be significant. So I think you're going to get a really sophisticated understanding of the complexities at play as it pertains to this Big Ten situation. Also, I want to talk with you in hour three. We're going to be joined by Donald Trump Jr., who I think you guys are going to enjoy, to talk about a little bit what it's like to be the son of a president. And I think that's going to be a fun conversation. So that discussion will happen in hour three. All of that still to come. But in particular right now, I want to focus on what I think is a really interesting question that isn't getting a great deal of attention. So last night I went out to dinner. Jason Whitlock and I went out to dinner. Whitlock, of course, has moved to Nashville. We had a lot of interesting conversations talking about the world of sports as we were eating. And prior to the dinner, I was interacting with somebody in a law firm that represents me, and he's a big-time NBA fan, big-time basketball fan, big-time fan in general of the world of sports. And we were having a conversation, and he said, I wanted to watch the Lakers and the Trailblazers because I just love great basketball. And I wanted to watch Damian Lillard, and I put it on, and he said, man, but when I put it on, I was immediately felt like all of the national anthem kneeling, the names on the back of the jerseys, the Black Lives Matter on the court, and he's a total middle-of-the-road, not political guy. And he said, I just wanted to watch Damian Lillard play basketball because I think he's one of the best shooters in the game right now. And instead, I felt like my senses were being assaulted by politics. He said, this is the first game I had watched in the NBA bubble. Ordinarily, I would have watched a ton of them. But he's like, I've got a serious job. I don't necessarily want to have to deal with politics when I want to just watch a really talented basketball player play. And I thought about that as I was watching the games last night and also looking at the ratings data that is out there. And the early games in the NBA playoffs according to Sportico, I was reading an article yesterday there. Last year, they averaged 2.7 million viewers per game. This year, they are averaging right around 1.7 million viewers per game. So that means that 1 million people, it's not a huge audience to begin with, right? 2.7 million first-round NBA playoff viewers. Around 1 million viewers that had otherwise been watching the NBA have decided not to watch the NBA this year. That's roughly, and again, I understand some of you are better at math, but that's roughly 40% of the audience. So everybody out there, this is an intriguing question. Everybody sees this data. 40% fewer people are watching the NBA playoffs so far this year compared to last year. And what's wild is, to me, it seems like there should be more people watching this year because there's a lot more people at home all day long, either working from home or not employed, unfortunately. There's just a lot more people who theoretically could sit down on the couch this year, given that there's 10% unemployment, given how many people are now able to work from home, than there has been in the past. Yet, clearly, people are watching the NBA in a lot smaller numbers. And I was having this conversation with Jason Whitlock, and you may have heard us talk about it a little bit on Monday, and I may need to bring him in again on Monday to discuss this angle with you guys. But we started talking about something that I think is interesting, which is the idea, basically, that people have stopped doing what is in the best interest of their employer, their company, and they've started doing what's in the best interest of themselves. And what I mean by that is this. Adam Silver has to see the data on kneeling, putting social justice warrior statements on jerseys, writing Black Lives Matter on the court, and he has to be looking at these television ratings with the other executives out there that are businessmen and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that his league is alienating millions of basketball fans, like the guy I was talking to yesterday, that would have otherwise watched the NBA that aren't because of the political statements that are being made. And some of you can say, well, those political statements are important, and that may well be true, but they're bad for business. And in particular, they're bad for business because it's one thing if you take a stand and you gain some viewers even as you lose others. It's bad in general for business, however, if you pick a choice and that choice gains you nothing and loses you a lot. I'll give you an example. If I decided this on this radio program, if I came on Monday morning and I said, hey, guys, I know that you are big football fans, and I know also that you are big basketball fans, but instead, for the rest of August, I've decided not to talk about basketball at all, and I've decided not to talk about football at all, and instead, I'm only going to talk about hockey and soccer on this radio program. Well, I might make a few hockey and soccer fans start to listen to this program. But I would get blown up by you guys out there who are football and basketball fans saying, particularly football, what in the world are you doing, Clay Travis? Why are you not talking about college football? Why are you not talking about the NFL? Why are you only talking about hockey and soccer? You don't even know that much about hockey and soccer. And those things could be true, but I could say, well, I want to make a political statement. I'm so angry on this show about the politics in basketball and the politics that is going to be in football that I have decided to not talk about basketball and I've decided to not talk about football. You could say to me, oh, that's very brave of you, Clay. It's good for you to use your platform to make a political statement about which sports you will talk about. Some of you might say that, but I would gain no listeners. I would gain almost no fans, and I would lose a ton of you. Because you would say, well, I want to hear people talk about basketball. I want to hear people talk about football. And so I'm going to find the show that talks about basketball and football more, and I'll listen to that one. From a business perspective, I would be making a disastrous decision because the listeners that I would gain from talking about soccer and hockey every day for the rest of the month are a small pinprick of the listeners that I would lose by not talking about the sports that the majority of my audience is watching. That's what the NBA is doing in a different arena. The NBA is gaining no fans by being political, and they are losing millions of fans by being political. There's nobody out there right now who said, I wasn't watching the NBA at all. But then they started kneeling and they put Black Lives Matter on the basketball court and they put social justice slogans on their jerseys. I didn't watch a single minute of the NBA, and now I watch the playoffs all day long. I put it on when they tip off in the early part of the day, and I turn it off at the end of the day. I watch 12 hours of NBA basketball. Thank God the NBA got political. Now I can finally listen to them. Now I can watch them. Nobody says that. There isn't a single sports fan in America who embraces that perspective. And so here's a question for you. It's a big deal that the NBA ratings are down and collapsing in the playoffs. How come nobody's talking about it? How come nobody is pointing out that when you get woke, you go broke? Your boy here, I told you exactly what was going to happen. I told you that we already knew from the NFL, and by the way, the NFL might make the same mistake that the NBA is making. I told you they were going to turn off millions of fans, that Twitter and Instagram aren't real life, and that everybody out there has to know it, but it's like nobody's willing to say it. And what do I mean by everybody has to know it, but nobody's willing to say it? Adam Silver knows that writing Black Lives Matter on the basketball court, kneeling for the national anthem, and writing social justice slogans on the jerseys, all three of those things combined for sure, are bad for the overall NBA brand. But he is so cowed now because he's a white guy who is the commissioner of a majority black league that he doesn't even feel comfortable saying, I guarantee you, what he actually thinks to those players because he's afraid he's going to get called racist if he says this is bad for the overall NBA brand. And this is maybe one of the most fascinating things about the importance of diversity. Diversity, if you have the right people in positions of prominence, can lead to greater truth-telling. Because I'm curious, I said this, for example, in the NFL. Like Roger Goodell knows that kneeling for the national anthem is going to be awful for the NFL's brand and awful for their ratings. And it's going to distract from the overall product in the NFL. But he also makes $40 million a year to be the commissioner of the NFL. So he's not going to say anything. In fact, he may do the opposite of what he truly believes because he's not worried about doing what's best for the NFL, and Adam Silver's not worried about what's doing best for the NBA. They're both worried about keeping their jobs because they're white guys at the head of majority black leagues. Whereas, think about this. And I don't know what she would say specifically about kneeling for the national anthem, but one of the other people who was mentioned as a potential replacement for Roger Goodell was Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State for George W. Bush, very accomplished PhD, government employee of the highest magnitude, highest ranking, huge football fan. Condoleezza Rice, big college football fan, big NFL fan. In our current identity politics era, Condoleezza Rice might be able to say things to the NFL players that Roger Goodell cannot. And that's very fascinating to think about. Because what you've got going on, I believe, is there's a lot of people out there across all of sports and a lot of other jobs too who know that their companies are making bad decisions, but they're so afraid of losing their own jobs that they're not saying anything about those bad decisions. And I'm going to have Jason Whitlock and I are going to unpack this on Monday because we had a good conversation about it at dinner. It's utterly fascinating because Adam Silver sees the same data that I see, the same data that you see, the same data that you guys are cognizant of. He has to know it's the wrong decision for the NBA to go super woke. Yet he's so afraid that if he points it out to the players that they're going to get him fired, that he pretends their idea to be super woke is a good one. And as a result, you don't get an honest discussion. You just get a one-sided argument that doesn't have any opposition. And this is what's going on, I believe, across the country in general. We talk a lot about diversity of color. We talk very little about diversity of opinion. And I think diversity of opinion is more important than diversity of color. Cosmetic diversity doesn't lead to actually good discussions and debates from a variety of perspectives. It leads to everybody preaching to the choir. When everybody looks different but thinks the same, you end up with disastrous decisions like what's going on in the NBA right now. And when everybody is afraid to say what they actually believe, that's how you end up losing a calamitous 40% of your audience because you got woke and you went broke in the process. It's fascinating to me to think about how we've ended up in this situation right now.